ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and get started. As we've seen in the past, our competition for committee members is tough this time of year, with a number of our committee members being on the various judiciary committees. We're missing some folks, but we're going to go ahead and get started. I will mention, and I failed to do this at our previous meetings. On the first meeting, I didn't adopt rules for our subcommittee, as Chairman Harbin asked us to do, and I will do so before we take any official action. The reason I didn't do it the first day is we had not met and constituted the rules for the Appropriations Committee, and since, as long as we do that before we take official action, I think we'll be well within our rights. Quorums are not required for subcommittees. Thanks for the question. So we'll be doing that. We have a number of folks today that are coming in for the first time, and then we have invited back, as the committee mentioned, they wanted to do the Departments of Juvenile Justice and Department of Corrections. That'll be at the end of today to go into a more detailed working resolution as we go through their budget. Ladies and gentlemen, what we want to hear today, and I know we have some attached agencies, the Department of Law, Department of Defense. I mean, we know times are tough. I'm not going to go through that whole thing again, but let's just stay focused on what we can do and what we are doing to help Georgia through this budget situation. So with that, and if the committee has no questions, we'll begin. I don't know if I am turned on or not. I have a red light. So the first folks we have in our batting order, the Post Council, Peace Officer Standards and Training Council. If you folks would come.
Number one in your heart. That's it. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the invitation. I don't think this will take very long at all. As you'll see with Section 37, which is ours, the Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, our departmental cut will be $136,531 for 09. That does not include the Sheriff's Association and the Georgia Chiefs contracts, where we are only a pass-through agency. So I know that's something that you'll deal with those two entities about. Reduction, obviously, in operating expenses and an auditor position, and savings from attritions from our part-time employees, and that's where the $136,531 figure comes from. In FY10, in the same tier areas, it goes up to $179,763. That's in 3711.3 and 3711.4. Again, those other two things with the Chiefs' sex offender registration money and the training funds for the Chiefs and the Sheriffs is not included in that figure, but since we're the pass-through agency, it shows on us.
Yeah, let's stay focused. I failed to mention that at the beginning, but let's just stay focused on 09.
Okay.
Committee members, if you have any questions. Committee members, you have us. This is at the bottom of page 57 of 59. The standard the state health benefit plan reduction, which is system-wide, if you will. The additional cuts that you see in the governor's recommendation are really very similar to the cuts. Can you tell us the differences of the cuts that you recommended and what were taken by the governor? Ms. Mitchell, if you need to help us with that as well, because there is a difference, is there not? You actually ended up with less cuts under the governor's recommendation than the agency had originally submitted. Is it okay? Is it the workers' comp? No, the state funds were from normally our departments had been just difference of workman's comp, but this was 383 down to 358. What is the, as they move things over, what were the difference? Do you know what those were? I know in some cases what they did is just move some numbers around and lined up the figures in a recognizable or a standard form, but in your case there seems to be a difference in funds. Do you know what that particular difference represents?
Mr. Chairman, I know that from what we submitted to what the governor actually recommended, if you look at what the agency's taking versus what the sheriffs and the chiefs are taking, the agency itself is taking an 8% cut, and the sheriffs and the chiefs are taking a 10% cut in fiscal year 09. So I think that's where the difference is, because as submitted, it was all at the same percentage level.
Okay. So these are just cuts spread a little bit differently in what we have listed as 3711.3 through 3711.11. Actually, 1110. You think those are just
yes, Mr. Chairman,
spread differently?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Okay. Committee, see where we're going there.
Do you think it's the difference between the agency's taking 8% and the sheriff's taking 10%, or vice versa?
Vice versa.
The agency's taking 8% and the sheriffs and chiefs are taking 10% in fiscal year 09. And then, yes, sir.
Let me ask you this. And Kendra, you may be able to help us here. I mean, 37-11-7, FY09, 10% rent. We're down $45,000. How do we come about doing that? I mean, how do we actually make that happen?
What we're doing, and it's not I guess clearly reflected in the budget document, is that the agency has a revenue stream through fees we charge, and what we're planning to do is to for all these costs except for the audit position, which we're just giving the money directly back, is we're planning to fund those expenses through our fees, so through our revenue account. We're planning to make up the difference that way.
So this is revenue that you have and you use to defer expenses?
We use it for operating costs. Like traditionally, we've used it to supplement. Papers, pencils, gasoline, that sort of thing.
Right.
This year, with the way things they are, we've of course cut back, save money where we can, and then in order to not have to let anyone go or cut mission critical expenses, we've instead started using a lot of those operating funds that we paid for with state money. We've instead paying for with fees. Now, the way we're doing that is recently our council actually created some additional fees and increased some existing fees. So we'd be happy to provide a fee schedule. If the committee, I don't have one with me, but we can certainly email one to staff.
If you could just get Ms. Mitchell the accounting of that revenue stream and how that money is expended. Again, if council has adopted a situation where you're charging more for the services, I'm not at all suggesting that you gobble that up into general fund revenues, but I think it's something that we want to look at. You mentioned that you're doing all of this, and if you will, upping fees and moving revenues and trying to do this so that you didn't have to let anybody go. If you were here or if you listened to any of these on the web last week, we're not really interested in RIFs and furloughs, and but except we're in that situation. I want to make sure that we're not doing anything in terms of a program reduction when a furlough situation or a reduction in force would better serve Georgia. I've real concerns that departments that we have heard from so far are more intent upon keeping their head count than they are about providing services. And I don't mean to label you guys as that's just a general statement. I keep hearing from people that furloughs are a short-term situation. Well, the long-term situation is a reduction in force, and that didn't come from you guys. It's come from other people. So I just want to make sure that again, feel like I'm the bad guy up here that always, it reiterates that, but I want to make sure that you guys are doing what you need to do for the people that you're training and providing that. And if we can consolidate services, in finance personnel, that we try to work to do that. I think it would probably be helpful, and Ms. Mitchell may already have this, if you can get us sort of an org chart of the individuals that are down there, so that we can just have a comfort level that we're doing that. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Not a problem. Mr. Chairman, we have 29 employees full-time statewide and 2 part-time employees to serve 59,000 certified law enforcement officers. We try to be, I'm kind of big on this, as fiscally prudent as we can with the people's money. And without that revenue trickle that we have, we'd be in a lot sorer shape today than not. I think the council saw back in early December when they passed these things that for us to do the training, the certification, investigations, and decertification of some police officers, that we needed these things to do it. And what we did when we added those fines, we did it for those people who try to take advantage of our system, the law enforcement officers that mess up. The people trying to do right, we didn't touch a single one. And that was our intention all along, to make those people that use the system and or abuse the badge, so to speak, for those things it cost them more, whereas before they'd been paying nothing.
Any have any further questions?
Yes, sir.
I saw what you were doing there with the 45,000 that Chairman asked you about rent. Are you doing the same thing with telecommunications, computers and equipment, or are you actually taking a loss in how are you actually predicting telecommunications by 10%, 16%?
Right. That's an excellent question, and it is the same. All the operating expenses, so the rentals and the telecommunications are under the same plan. Whereas we'll cut in state funds, and then actually with the revenue account, yes, sir. And then also, Mr. Chairman, if I may, just to follow up with Mr. Vance's comment, one of the things we're doing as a cost-saving measure is hiring those part-time employees. We actually have. Just to correct something, actually 25 full-timers, and we have part-timers that we use to do some of the more, I guess you would call them mundane tasks, some of the clerical work that we can pay someone part-time to it and not have to hire someone on a full-time position. And as you can see there in the request, we're actually giving up a position that the legislature had given us. So I think there was a recognition on the legislature's part that we do need more people, and just because of what budget cuts are now, we're actually having to give that directive back. We haven't hire anybody. We'd actually looked into the hiring process when the news came down that we're going to have to take a cut. So we're certainly doing what we can with what we can, and the fees themselves were something that were already in place before the cuts came about. We just took a harder look at that once we found out that we weren't going to get what we thought we were.
This is going to sound, I guess, a little crazy, but so really, what we're not necessarily cutting the operating expenses of the organization. You're just getting the money from someplace else. It's not state dollar. You're just getting, and perhaps you've already done this, and if you haven't, and I'm kicking the can again, I apologize, but before you try to get the money from somebody else, or you might use that money to do something else, did you look at reducing your telecommunication expenses? I know your rental, you're probably under contract, I don't know if you can do anything with that, but your computer charges, your equipment. For one, we're spending $160,000 on communications, telecommunications. Has anybody done an audit? How many?
If you'll remember now, y'all gave us some money to redo our 19-year-old telecommunications a couple of years ago, and we have one person now because we just lost one that we'll try to justify and get replaced, but we lost our programmer. And we have one person doing both those sides. Is that where that money is?
Telecommunication. I'm thinking of dial tone and broadband and data stuff. And I'm not talking about personnel.
I'm sorry. I think, and to answer your question, yes, we have. we've looked at some of our dedicated lines that we have between us and the training center, doing away with those. Some of the VPN technology we looked at. So we have gone to savings, actually, savings that were taken out of our budget initially in fiscal year 09. You'll see cuts there that the governor had originally taken in the general budget itself. So we have taken a look at these things. Our telecommunications budget shouldn't be $160,000. The operating expenses themselves. Well, let me back up. What we're doing with all these cuts, the operating expenses, the rent, all those things like that, we're literally at a point now where the state dollars are going to people. That's all we're paying for, using our state money to pay for, and then every other expenditure we're doing with revenue. And we're doing that again, like we said, we feel like, and I feel like it's a justified position, that the physicians themselves are not the best level to match the population we're serving. As Mr. Vance said, we have over 50,000 peace officers alone, and then when you look at law enforcement professionals, it's well over 120,000 people that we're regulating with a 25-person plus part-time agency. So I feel like we're being a good steward of those funds and doing what we can with the revenue that we're not having to ask or take out of the general fund, but money we're actually charging to people who are doing wrong, violating the law and post rules to fund some of those expenses.
I understand. So what do you have to write checks for on an annual basis for telecom, for dial tone, for data, for so you have dedicated pipes between your various facilities as opposed to?
Well, the telecommunications itself, and I think we have a different document here. If the document you have says that our telecommunications expenses are $160,000 a year, that...
No, I was just 10% of telecommunications is $16,000. I'm extrapolating to 160. So
okay.
if that verbiage that kind of went in that cut, that's where I'm getting to 160.
Okay.
That's the reason I came up with the question. If you're telling me that
with you.
we're not spending 160 on telephones, then the question goes away. I'm just extrapolating up from that number.
Okay, I'm sorry. Our actual telecom expenditure, again, just off the top of my head, and I can get you a hard and fast number if you'd like. I'd say it's probably around $20,000 to $25,000, and what that includes is.
Oh, I mean, unless somebody else wants here, you don't have to belabor that. You can get the information to Ms. Mitchell if you want. I mean, that tells me. I just looked down and it seemed. So if you're paying 25 or so thousand, you understand why I would look down and extrapolate to 160 and wonder what was going on. Okay. Well, that was it. I think we would like to ask, and we've asked of the other agencies, the larger agencies, if you will, in terms of money, for a look into the base budget. So, and I think Ms. Mitchell may be able to do that. But if you could work with her to let her have all that information, it just makes us look, makes it easier for us to look into.
Absolutely.
Do we have any further questions, Representative Powell? We got anything down there you want to? Chairman Brennan?
One simple question. You probably have a bottom line. I'm just curious, what are the fees that you collect on an annual basis that are not tax dollars? Do you know what that is?
I could tell you, last year it was approximately $170,000 for the full fiscal year.
Thanks.
Further questions? Anything? Any other wisdom you need to spread on us before we go for 09? No, I was just going to give you the last word.
No, we're team players here. We'll do the best we can.
Well, no, I appreciate it, and that wasn't a trap question.
No, not a problem.
If not, we'll move on to the agenda. Next item we have the Department of Law. That's on page 48 of 59.
We're saving everything.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. 45.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm going to give you a handout, and I'll go ahead and start talking if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman.
Sir.
I know your time is tight. First of all, thank you all so much for the opportunity to come by and and talk to you about these budget cycles. I know how difficult it must be right about now to make ends meet. I heard you mention a minute ago, Mr. Chairman, that the committee's concern is, of course, services that are rendered by the agencies, and I couldn't agree more with you on that statement. I'm proud to say that, we do one thing, and hopefully we do one thing well, and that is to provide legal services to the state of Georgia. We do not have, like other agencies, we don't have a lot of programs that we provide. We do one thing, and that's provide legal services. In that regard, we don't have a very complex budget. About 90% of our overall budget goes toward paying salaries for the employees who work in the law department, who provide these legal services to the state of Georgia. Of that 10% that's left, a significant portion of that goes toward things, mandatory cost, rent, telecommunications, things of that nature. We probably end up working with about 7 or 8% of our overall budget that are non-salaried, non-mandatory expenses that we have to incur during the course of the year. So it is always a very tight budget for us and a very difficult thing for us to do when we're talking about meeting the kinds of budget cuts that have been asked of the state's law department. But I want to tell you some of the things that we're doing trying to make these goals. We've been looking at retirement from some of our senior people in the law department. We've eliminated the state's law library. The legislature gave us permission to close it down, and we've been able to save monies as a result of eliminating positions that were affiliated or associated with the operation of the state's law library. We had a wonderful intern program. I really hate to see it go because it was kind of a feeder program for the law department. It's tough for us to compete with private law practices out there nowadays when they start lawyers at the kind of salaries that they start them at. So our internship program allowed us to have a feeder system so we could get these lawyers, hopefully keep them in the law department after completion of the internship program, where we've had to eliminate that program altogether. Hopefully we'll get back to a point where we can pick that back up. We've tightened down on our travel. We're not doing anything other than non-essential travel. We've seen and been able to incur some savings through computer services, through software purchases. OPB has suggested, and we've agreed and worked with them on freezing some secretarial positions within our law department. Plus, we are now looking at additional equipment, freeze on our equipment purchases altogether, freezes on non-essential computer purchases in the law department. We're holding some of our vacancies where possible. We're reducing part-time employees within the law department. We're trying everything that we can within that small framework of our budget that we have to find some cost savings. The governor has recommended essentially another $500,000 or so in budget cuts, and has recommended the elimination of 5 positions for the law department. We are trying to work through that as well. This is a difficult challenge for us, I will tell you, but we are trying our best to work through that recommendation. What we're here to ask you all to do today is really not cut us any deeper. I'm not so sure that we're going to be at a point where we can continue to provide the services that we have to provide and that we're required to provide from a legal standpoint if we're required to cut any deeper than where we are. I have, what I've been most proud of, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, is the fact that last year in 2008 you all were kind enough to give us additional positions, about 20 lawyer positions, to help us do more of our work in-house to provide the one service that we provide. You have a chart. I always like to update you on this because I think it is impressive what we're able to do. My argument to you has always been, ever since I've been Attorney General, if you allow us to do the work in-house with the appropriate resources, we can save the state money. There's no question about it. We do the work at about 50% of the cost in-house as to what it costs us to send it out. So as a result of the additional bodies we got for FY08, we were able to save the state $5.4 million just as a result. And then that was not the total year because we had to bring lawyers on as we could hire them. So without a full clear year cycle, we were still able to generate about $5.4 million in savings on behalf of the state. We project that savings will increase for FY09, that we're actually going to generate about $8.7 million in savings on behalf of the state because we're able to now utilize and continue to provide those services through the additional bodies that you were kind enough to give us. So we're continuing to see happen what we thought would happen and what we represented to you would happen with the additional lawyers we had in the office. So I say all of that, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, to say this. We're trying to do the best we can to provide the services that we are required to provide. Unlike a private law practice, we don't have the option of sending legal work back. It comes to us and we're required to provide it. And in hard economic times, quite frankly, our work goes up. We see more bankruptcy filings. We see more lawsuits and litigation against the state of Georgia. Our work actually goes up. And so we're trying to maintain what we are having to do, plus the additional burden that comes along with this economic crisis that we're experiencing, and trying to do it at a cost-effective way. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my story to you today, and we appreciate any help you can give us.
Mr. Chairman, we appreciate you coming by. Just a few questions that I have relative to this. I noticed you two, the numbers were changed a bit from the governor's recommendation to the agency, and we can get to those exactly. But I think you actually had some monies restored over your recommended cuts, if I'm looking at this correctly.
Only the FY, or I'm sorry, only the 10% showing on that document. So they truly requested 6, 8, and 10% cuts, but because of the way that the data rolled up, only the 10% is shown.
So the agency request was shown at 10%.
Right.
The governor took
Probably
6%. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's what I mean. It's just those again are ratios that were reduced. Okay. Fair enough. Couple of questions. What does this leave you? I mean, with the budgeted amounts from last year, how many attorneys do you have in the department now?
We've got
how many total personnel in the?
We've got a total of about 221 employees in the law department. About 135 of those would be lawyers in the law department. That is, that includes the 20 slots that you all gave us in 08, the 135.
Okay. In that, and this is something we found out last year, do you have your own payroll function, your own finance function within your department, within those employees?
Yes.
I'm just scratching my head and wondering why we do that. We had departments last year that had 111 employees and they had a whole payroll staff, and then it just seems like a centralized payroll system would be kind of the way to go here in the.
I mean, we're talking 2 people, so it's not.
I understand, but
yes,
we're talking 2 for
payroll.
here. 2. I mean, there's a company out there with 1,000 employees and they run their payroll with.
Here's the other thing I would add to that, Mr. Chairman. Remember that we handle a ton of SAG work that comes through our office.
Well, that's AP. That's not payroll.
Right. But I'm talking about in terms of getting checks issued, making sure that lawyers are paid. We consider that a salary function as well.
So the people that you refer to, the 2 people at payroll, are really just accounting people?
No, we have 2 that are particularly done as payroll, but we do consider our SAGs as not employees, but on our the system that we maintain, the case management system we maintain, they are treated as employees. But the payment of those does go through an accounts payable system.
Yeah, if we can, I would like to And I don't know that this does anything for us in 09, but I want to look across the function. And I'm going to suggest it be looked across all state government, that we get a more of a centralized look at the payroll function. I mean, it just makes sense. I mean, I know I'm not suggesting there could be one, because we're a huge state with a large number of employees, but it just seems like there's sort of by definition some duplicate efforts there.
And Mr. Chairman, as you're looking at that, could I ask you all to consider looking at this for us as well? You know, the governor has recommended the elimination of 5 positions. It would be a great help to us if those positions could be restored, even on an unfunded basis. Because if we're able to secure some funding with non-state dollars that might help us with positions in the law department, we would need to have the position to fill. And so even if we were able to have those positions back on a non-funded basis, it doesn't cost the state anything, it's revenue neutral. We're always hopeful of trying to find ways to supplement the state law department's budget, and if we're able to do it, that would be a tremendous help. I certainly would appreciate it if you all would look at that.
What are those 5 vacant positions that are currently not funded that's being talked about in the governor's recommendation? If you don't have them right now, if you could just get them
Yeah,
in
we
this
can get it.
pencil.
I can get those for
Yeah.
you.
Fair enough. Ms. Chambers, did you have a question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I believe at our last meeting we had actually identified a Westlaw lobbyist, Mark Middleton, and we were wondering, after talking with some of our judges, if there was any way we can negotiate a single statewide contract. And Mark Middleton, who is the lobbyist for Westlaw, is going to approach Westlaw on that, and I was wondering if it would be too much of a burden to have the Attorney General's office negotiate that for the state.
Be glad to help you with.
The idea is, with electronics being and internet being what it is, there's no reason why we can't have a statewide contract for all agencies associated with the state that use Westlaw, because you need those sites, you need that information, and with the disbandment of the law library, immediate access to as much information as possible with LexisNexis and Westlaw, I think will be able to give you a pretty well across the board chunk of info that you need. And if you can just maybe keep your ears open, if there's somebody in your office who would be good at doing that, I'd like to talk to him at some point.
We'd be glad to help.
Yeah,
anything that can help us save, we're glad to do.
Yeah, we'll get Mr. Middleton to start working with the corporation first, so that way we don't have
Have him call me directly, and then
Okay.
I'll get him to the appropriate people in the office to
Okay.
help with it.
Thank you.
Glad to do it.
Further questions?
I have a couple.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Baker, I wanted to just ask a little bit about the vacancies. You're eliminating five positions. How many vacancies will you have left if those were eliminated?
We'd be right at 217.
If my memory's correct,
17,
those-
216, 217
those
would be our
five
total.
are 2 from the library, 2 secretaries, and maybe it was 3 secretaries, I believe. And right now we have 1 attorney vacancy. So we would have that one.
So it'd be 6. You'd have 6 vacancies left. Is that what
No,
you're
that's
saying?
what we have right now, and of those 5 are being taken.
Oh, so you'll have 1 vacancy left.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you really are going to be tight.
We don't. Yeah, they've
We
taken.
don't run with vacant positions ever. We fill them.
Some agencies I think carry up vacancies. We've never
Yes,
carried vacancies.
that's what I'm trying to dig into to try to determine if that's your case. The 20 attorneys positions we gave to you last year, did you fill them all?
We fill those positions.
And then also turnover ratios. How does that look for you now among your attorneys?
This I like to say is seasonal sometimes. We're doing probably better now because of the economic times than we've done in the past. And I think lawyers are, really trying to find positions. They're getting laid off from big firms downtown, and so we've seen lawyers come and stay longer. Our biggest challenge has always been in the 1 to 5 year range for turnover. We can be a little competitive getting them in, but we tend not to be competitive keeping them. And so when they get to the 4 or 5 year range, they want to move out of the apartment, they get married, they need more money, and then we start to lose them. So our turnover rate is higher than I would like to see it, but I think better now than it's been in years gone by.
Thank you.
Do you have any further questions? And, I'm not a lawyer, so forgive me if I don't ask this in the correct way, but I think in a lot of professional services firms, law firms, perhaps accounting firms, there's a manner by which you track folks, the time they're spent on a case. I know you don't necessarily put an attorney on a case and go, hey, you have 12 hours to finish that, but you track time to go through.
We track by hours.
Within my firm, we even track people that aren't billable to an account. We track their time on it because we just like to know what that thing costs. We talked a little bit about it last year, and we don't want to overburden, but are you tracking those hours back to when you're using state employee attorneys back to when requests are made? Are those things being tracked to the level that we could go back to, whether it be the Department of Transportation or DHR or DJJ? Commissioner Murray here, I'm picking on him, he just happens to be on first, when they call upon you for service? Because I wonder, when you mention the SAGs and someone has to call you in and there's a check that's written, that tends to come out of their budget. When somebody calls you and you're using a state attorney, that comes out, if you will, of your budget or a lost opportunity for another department. And we still need to be mindful of the amount of resources. Again, we don't want to price anyone in state government out of the use of the Attorney General's office, but do you track that well enough that we can feed that back to the various departments so that the commissioner or the head of that department can be aware of their need? I mean, it's
we do.
a long
If it's
question.
one thing lawyers fuss most about is having to keep up with all those hours. Yeah,
Right.
we can track that, and
Well,
we do track it.
I'm not interested in 10-minute increments or 6 tenths of an hour, but just in general, so that we could feed back to folks. And again, my important case is somebody else's boondoggle, or vice versa. But I still think it makes sense. Many times people look over at the AG's office and go, they're just over there and they don't cost anything. Well, you are, but you do.
Right.
So I'd like to try to, since it is our budget, I remember we talked about last year, GBA bills us for rent. GTA bills us for technology. And by the way, they're about to bill you again for technology. I saw that line that got added to your budget.
I saw that.
So, but we don't bill people, if you will, back internally for your time. And I'm not suggesting some sort of policy change whereby we do that. But I think if it's tracked and handed off, it makes things a little bit easier. So to the extent we can do that without adding administration and cost, I think that just makes sense, because it makes us more cognizant of the resources that we're using.
I had one more follow-up question, if I may. Thurber, you'd mentioned about doing the restoration of the 5 positions, even if they're unfunded. Can you help me understand how that would help?
Well, if we're able to generate some money, if we get a grant, sometimes we're able to get grant dollars through the National Association of Attorneys General. Sometimes we'll get grant dollars as a result of some settlement that's been reached out there in the marketplace. If we're able to get the dollars to fund a position in the law department from non-state sources, and it could be anywhere, we're able to then fill a slot that we have, but without the slot, we can't fill it.
I understand. That helps a lot. Thank you.
I have one further question. You mentioned the intern program.
Yes, sir.
And if I heard you correctly, it's something that you don't feel like you'll be able to do as much?
We aren't doing it at all now. We've eliminated it.
And the reason for that is?
Budget. Just budget. There was a cost associated with it.
Was that to pay the interns a stipend?
Yes.
You don't think in this job market you'd have people that would be willing to come and work for the experience? I mean, if not, it's not, but I would suspect, for the same reason you mentioned earlier, that law firms are tighter on hiring and the competitive nature of the business. I guess I would just encourage you to leave that door open.
And we
should young law student that wishes to get ahead and gain from the experience that you and your staff could offer them, would want to avail themselves of your. I mean, I don't want you to undersell yourself. I think that working in the AG's office for a summer in whatever capacity has got to be good to put on one's resume in a competitive job market. So,
Mr. Chairman, that's a good observation, and you're exactly right. I've asked staff to look at trying to do this on an unfunded basis, and hopefully we'll continue to get the same quality of students to come in and help us. And you hope that is the case.
Right.
But a lot of them have options.
Sure.
They can work for us, or they can work for one of the big firms downtown. It'll be harder, but not impossible.
Right. Very good. Any further questions? Further questions of the Attorney General? If we could, and if you would just follow up with Ms. Mitchell on those several items, particularly the, how we might help you guys with the, or work with you on the workload thing, and then the finance, and how we might be able to work to consolidate some of those efforts. I would appreciate it. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time, Mr. Attorney General. The next week we have the Department of Defense. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, that's on page 23 of 59 of your documents. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
They print these budget sheets smaller every year, or my eyes are going bad. I don't know which. Whenever you're ready, sir.
Okay, just give you a quick overview of the Department of Defense. Now, we've discussed it before. The Department of Defense is basically the Guard and youth programs, as well as a few other federally funded activities. The Guard is really broken into two pieces. I know a budget is three: administration, military readiness, and youth programs. It's really the military readiness and youth programs. The department, the youth programs we'll talk about in a minute, are a joint federal-state partnership. 60% of the youth programs are paid with federal funds, 40% state. As a match, the other portion, the military readiness piece of the Department of Defense, if you take our military side budget, which you don't necessarily see in your budget documents, is leveraged about 98.5% federal. So it's a very heavy federal program, with the state essentially having certain required activities to provide to essentially have the Guard in the state. The Guard has been in particularly Army Guard, in a very much a growth mode the last few years, with the help of the General Assembly on a recruitment bonus program we put in place about 5-6 years ago now, which you'll see later in the budget being taken out now. We learned how to recruit very well, and then when the feds decided they wanted to start funding activities like that, we have been very successful and the best recruiting state in the country now. That being said, we've grown from about 8,000 Army soldiers in Georgia to about 11,500 today over the last 5 years. That's been a tremendous growth, and give you an idea of the economic impact, every 1,000 soldiers we add to strength will bring about $20 million directly into an economy of whatever portions of the state they're being stationed at a minimal cost to the state. So we've been in a growth mode, which has required expansion of facilities, and as you look at the long-term bond picture, you'll see that we're building new armories across the state to accommodate that existing and hopefully continued growth. The Air Guard, like all agencies, the Guard is different than every agency is different. I'll give you a picture of our situation. We have almost all of the state funds coming into the non-youth programs are leveraged and matched somewhere. There are 519 positions in the Georgia Department of Defense that are state positions paid for with state checks. Of those, 25 of those are 100% state paid. We have very few total state positions. We have 190 that are 100% federal paid. If we talk about the issue of furloughs and furlough of state employees, that becomes a very important aspect. We have another 230 that are 60% federal paid, 40% state, and a blend of the other 51 positions ranging from 10% state to as much as 50% state. So it's a highly leveraged agency, and we basically had to look in the non-youth program side at our state positions, those 25 that are totally state funded, to find cuts. And at this point, you'll see that if you looked at the structure of the Department of Defense today versus a year and a half ago, you're looking at an agency that is basically cut out middle management. You'll see that the Director of Workforce Development is gone, the Director of Public Affairs is gone, Director of IT, Director of Joint Operations, as well as a couple of miscellaneous positions in budget and training, as well as the Army ATAG secretarial help. So we're having to take those cuts in the admin side. Most of our funds, other than that, are in buildings and or utilities, which are funded either 50-50 state and federal by federal law, or in the Air Guard case, 75% federal funds and 25% state on the air bases. So we basically had to look in our military readiness side to the state employees. If you look at the details of the Youth Challenge budget, with changes that have been made over the last couple of years, we had about $219,000 in that budget that was not matching federal funds at the time. That was cut, obviously, immediately. And the 09 cuts reflect another $30,000 of state funds above that, about $45,000 in federal funds matching it, for a total cut of about $264,000. That eliminates about 130 kids from going through that program, and most of you are familiar with the great success of that program for high school dropouts. Just to reflect how that affects the 010 budget, in 9 we were insulated some in Youth Challenge. There was an additional, the General Assembly in its wisdom had put some upfront money to, sorry sir.
Just want to stay on 9 today.
Okay, stay on 9. I guess that's general comments. I would open it to your questions at this point.
Committee have any questions in regards to this budget? Yes, Terry.
I've got one, may have others, but just while you're on the Youth Challenge program and the cuts, if I understood what you just said, you're cutting an additional $264,000 out of the 09, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And how many kids will that take us from where we were at in 08 to 09 as far as on the
graduations?
Yes.
About 130. Typically, a cost of a Youth Challenge cadet is about $14,000 apiece. We have 4 classes a year, 2 each at Fort Stewart and at Fort Gordon in Augusta. The reason that is a large number of kids to a small amount of budget is those additional unmatched dollars basically are coming off the top. We've been able to add kids with a couple of thousand additional dollars by essentially expanding platoons a bit and having more bang for the buck with those additional dollars. So those first dollars really hit a lot of kids. The $1.3 million cut in the 10 budget, I won't go into the 10 budget any further, but actually affects about 330 kids because you're actually cutting complete platoons and staffing to go with that at that point.
How many are you graduating a year?
We were graduating almost 1,000, about 920 to 30 kids, which are all high school dropouts, all just give you a little information. I don't mean to take your time, but we take kids who have dropped out. They're out at least 30 days. Most are in trouble of one type or another. Studies show that 85% of those will be in your court system in a very short period if they're not already there. Our success rate with those kids is about 94%. That is about the best bang for the buck you can get. And I would tell you that in particularly the 10 budget, we are very much regret having to cut the federal dollars we fought so hard to get, and probably we won't get them back at a later point. So we're probably talking about permanent reductions of those academies.
Just to follow, make sure I understand, the $264,000 cut here will eliminate 130
about 130 kids that we would have had it on.
All right, thank you.
May I have further questions? Yes, sir. Let me ask about the order of choice, if you don't mind. The scholarship program that we have in the state, which is divided out between the various congressional districts, is that administered by Department of Defense, or is that under some other?
That's administered by scholarships. The department name is one that handles all the scholarships. Student finance.
Student finance for the
we have
military
obviously
schools.
a great interest in it, in that North Georgia College and Georgia Military Institute.
Correct.
We get a tremendous number of officers and recruits out of that, and I understand there are some cuts made that has a tremendous impact on us, but it's
Okay.
not a direct cut within our budget.
Okay, but is that being cut back, you say?
I don't know. I hear you hear things, but that's not my area of.
Oh, that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Committee have any further questions?
I have one for the
Yes, sir.
question, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to get a picture of what you're eliminating from your administration. You mentioned 2 or 3 positions that you're eliminating. What is that in dollars? What does it represent?
Well, it represents. It's difficult. It's difficult to nail down directly. There's about 200 and just let me pull it. There's 100 and in the 09 budget. There's 55,000 directly in administration and another 150,000 shown in military readiness. We also are showing the transfer of dollars which came out of those personnel of about 66,000 out of administration. We've had to. I'll give you a little explanation of what growth has meant to us. We've had to open a temporary armory up in Cumming and rent a building for about $250,000 a year. The state's share of that is $150,000. We're having to essentially capture those dollars where we can't come in and essentially request funding for it. We have to essentially eliminate personnel and capture those dollars and transfer in to pay those bills and the utilities that go with it. So the actual total cost of those, just the 5 positions, is probably somewhere in the 400 plus range, but I'd have to break it down directly. We've had to do so much internal movement just to try to pay utility bills with these cuts. It kind of gets masked.
If it's not too inconvenient, I'd be interested to see that breakdown if you can do that.
Do it.
In anticipation of a lot of those cuts, we had already, that's what Michael was referring to, we've moved the funds to cover those utilities, the coming lease. 2 of the positions within admin really weren't even funded.
Okay.
There.
Due to shifting funds previously for utilities. A picture of us, I told you that most of our, we have to pay 50% of utilities for all the armories in the state. The state does, as well as maintenance, and that has become difficult in the past few years, and we've been, as we're all said, have already cut a couple of positions just to shift over and pay them. This 09 budget, we are going to be very fortunate to pay the utilities with what's left in there. And I will tell you now that we will be back discussing how we're going to pay utility bills next year, the way it sits now.
So you don't have any vacant positions at this time? All your positions are filled?
We've got, right now, have vacant positions. No, not at all. I've got 30-odd vacant positions in Youth Challenge that we're doing just to make up the cuts that we're looking at and anticipating now. I've got about 6 vacant positions and 100% state funded because we're holding them vacant. I'd like to keep those positions there in case we can find a way to get the feds to agree to pay for them, but I don't see that coming. But so we have a lot of positions vacant, and that's how we're making budget today.
Thank you.
Again, these things just come up when I'm in here, and I don't mean this to be critical, but we need to see what you're spending the money on. And I say that in terms of trying to help you. I mean, for years, Colonel Hitchens, had to take, personnel money because he had positions that were unfilled in order to pay, for the gas. As gas prices increased in the patrol cars, and we didn't realize the fact that the gas price was going up. I would offer the same thing for you guys as we get back, and we're going to spend some more time. I think there's a bill coming out of the Senate. Chairman Chambers had one, last year that talked about more of a, people throw around the term zero-based budget. I'm not sure everybody means the same thing when they talk about that, but what we're talking about is to see where the really money lines up. I mean, if it's in your base budget and it's for personnel and you've been using it for the last 5 years to pay utilities and rent, we need to know that.
Well,
I mean, we're not in a position. I'm not. This is no way critical. I'm just saying, in order for us to get into a position so that we can adequately fund your department, that we can't print money these days. I mean, money's tight, but to get in a position so we know what's going on, that makes sense to us. So if you could help us do that, that would be great. Tell me a little bit more about the armory. I mean, what made us have to get into that armory, to have to go lease another building, and what are we leasing for $250,000 a year?
Well, we're leasing with some changes, an old two-level pharmacy, not an old one, a fairly new one. What got us into that position is continued growth and the inability to house soldiers. We have on the military construction projects an armory in the coming area that we hope will come up next year for construction. We have about a dozen. We have in fact, we have 4 armories that were put on the construction budget because of growth in certain states. See, and I don't want to tell you more than you want to know, but there were 20 armories identified nationally for places where the Guard was growing so fast it couldn't accommodate the growth. They could recruit to that level. Georgia got 4 of those projects. 2 of them we're putting on military bases where we could, which 100% federal funds in those cases. 2 will be constructed partnerships, federal, state. That one in coming was to find a home for those soldiers. In the meantime, we had nowhere to put them. We either turned down the growth, which is the manpower increase to accommodate these new units, or we accept them and find a place to put them. And this is a case where you're talking about a lot of soldiers and a lot of income in the community, and we accepted the mission, recruited it, and had to have a place to put them. We recognize that we would have to essentially shift funds over. Now, I think we've shown where we did that. In fact, you look at the budget, you'll see a $66,000 shift from administration into military service. That's half of the state's share of that we couldn't accommodate out of the shifts into the military side of the budget, and we just cut a person to do it. So it's a matter of finding growth where you can get it. These are long-term units. And like I said, every 1,000 soldiers we bring in new strength brings over $20 million into communities. It's hard to turn your back on that when the opportunity is there. There are going to be additional opportunities as the military budgets in Washington are showing the Guard growing from a national strength of about 350,000 to about 370 plus. Georgia will get more opportunities there, and it's another case where we'll be sitting down with the powers that be and OPB and the governor and yourselves and talking about what it takes to accommodate those people and what kind of money it brings into the state. But that's why the decision was made on coming. We consulted with everyone, letting them know that was to set these units, we had to have a place to put them. Everybody agreed to it. We agreed that we would get rid of whatever we needed to get rid of to pay the bill.
Okay. Further questions? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Before the Department of Juvenile Justice. Next, folks, we have on the agenda Public Safety Training Center, page 58 of 59.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
I guess.
There you go.
Page 58 of 59.
Yeah, and we will stick with FY09, and I think you've got the numbers in front of you. But just a general introduction. When we were notified early in the fiscal year that there were going to be cuts, we didn't just plan for 6. We went ahead and planned for the 8 and the 10. We currently have 9 vacant positions, and the reason we have 9 vacant positions is because we know we don't have the money to fill them. A lot of what we did is we looked at operating expenses, and we took some money from operating expenses, and we're able to continue to tighten our belt. We've had water reductions where we're paying less for water through some of the savings we put on shower heads that look like a fog now instead of a stream. And we've done a lot of things that you'll see in here where we've cut back on everything that we can to try to make this budget work. And I'd be glad to answer any questions. Go to direct lines if you want to talk about direct lines where there have been cuts.
The same thing we have here is just the difference in the governor's recommendation and the agency's request is just the reflection of the proportionate cuts that the governor took. Is that correct? I mean, with the exception of workman's comp, I think that's out there in every case.
Some of those are from basic classes that state agencies are not having. Trooper school, we don't have one in right now. GBI school, there's not one in. Pardon and parole, Department of Corrections has cut at least 3 of the basic trainings they were going to do there. So every time you cut one of those large classes, you take away direct operating costs we have for meals and some of the other direct costs we have for electricity and water and so forth. If they're not there.
Do we have any further questions? I mean, I've asked the same thing, and we can get, if you wouldn't mind getting with Ms. Mitchell, but I'm looking at the same thing with, payroll function, administration. It just seems like those things we are going to try, unless I'm, overruled within the public safety function, where it makes sense, we're going to try to consolidate.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, since we're an attached agency with DPS, a lot of that's done through DPS, so we really don't have that same kind of function.
Well, good. At least we don't have it broken out to that level, because I think we have it broken out too far. That's good.
Sure.
Any further questions? I have a question, and we'll have these folks up later. But I know you train folks. You train folks for law enforcement across the state. You train for corrections. You train for the juvenile justice.
If I could interject before you go on, sir.
Yes, sir.
We have 2 missions. One of them is to deliver training ourselves. The other is to facilitate state agencies training.
Right.
And we see a lot of facilitation where we provide a pistol range, we provide driver training and so forth. Part of ours, a lot of our expense is facilitation of somebody else's training.
All right. Well, where I'm going to go, and we'll have them up later, I don't mean to ask you this question about their budget, but in the Department of Corrections budget, they list a line to consolidate training activities at the new TIF campus. And it's no secret to anybody that I've not been a warm to spending the money on that capital project. And what I saw a couple of years ago is I thought was going to be a tight budget, and we've been proven right. But they reflect $1.3 million in savings to consolidate to the TIF campus in FY09. Are you losing training to the TIF campus before June of this year? I mean, I'm trying to. Do you have any idea where that would? And I'll ask.
Sure, I don't have any idea where they came up with.
Fair enough. I just know that's some of the function you do for them that they would be moving. Can you tell me this, to the level you might know? Will opening that facility affect your operation? I know it's going to provide you more bandwidth, more seats, but do you lose anything in the process that's going to ultimately, perhaps, you're going to come back looking to us for extra money?
Well, let me answer that in 2 ways. The training center was built based upon an average, and this is 1987. We've been open 22 years now. It was built on an average daily attendance by students of about 500 students a day. I mean, that's why we have a dorm that holds 498 people. We built it on an average occupancy of about 500 a day. We've been running for the past 18, 19 years, 1,100 to 1,300 people a day. So we've more than doubled what we built the training center for. Now, that capacity has strained us beyond limits sometimes, to the point that we actually start cooking at 3:30 in the morning. We don't shut the kitchen down till 10 at night. We provide over 100,000 meals a month. Now, we have filled up the dorms many, many times, and when somebody can't get a room in our dorm, if they're eligible, then they go to a local motel under contract with us, and we pay the tab on that. Now, that doesn't happen every day, but we have an occupancy rate that Holiday Inn would die for.
Right.
But if that answers your question, I mean, does it give us some relief if they move their operation to TIF? Absolutely. We've turned the chapel into a classroom. We've turned... honorably so. We went to the Chaplain Association, got them to agree to it. But we turned the chapel into a classroom. We turned what was going to be the PX, which we call Dorm Meeting Room 1, into a classroom. We turned the conference center bays, which are huge bays. They're terrible classrooms. We had to have the space. So does it help us? Absolutely. Okay. Now, direct money savings, I can't tell you how much that's going to help.
Okay. Any questions? Public Safety Training Center.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Committee members, we have a more detailed presentation from the Department of Juvenile Justice and the Department of Corrections as we wanted to walk through. There were some programs that the members wanted to get through in more detail. That's the reason we kind of got to this table. Before we get into that, I've got about 12 after. We'll stand in recess, give everybody a few minutes to step around to maybe 20 after 3, and we'll come back, and that'll give us about an hour and 40 minutes for DJJ and Department of Corrections. So we'll stand in recess till 20 after. Well, we're on page 33 of 59. 33 of 59. Chairman. Commissioner Murray, you have to talk real slow because my eyes are not following that.
Well, talking slow is not a problem for me, Mr. Chairman. I can accommodate.
All right, if we could, where did Gerald Green go? There he is.
Please shut the door, Mr. Chairman.
We could do that. No,
It takes me a little longer to get around now.
No, you're good. We just want to close the door so it wouldn't be so loud. No, you're fine.
It just echoes. Thank you.
Okay, this is our second pass at the Department of Juvenile Justice that we wanted to go through, both given the magnitude of their budget and the reductions that are necessary and specific questions that some of the members of the committee had. So we kind of wanted to do it around the table here so we'd have an opportunity to just sit and ask. Does the committee have any specific questions that they want to have? We brought these folks back. I know I had asked the commissioner to look at other things, to get into details with us if he could. What's the committee's pleasure? Is there questions before we go forward?
I'm pleased.
You're pleased that we're here? Or
I'm just
raining
pleased.
outside, just you're pleased?
Yeah, I'm just pleased.
Well, good.
It's our pleasure.
Mr. Commissioner, you have a large agency. You've done some things. I know there's been some questions about which programs and why and so forth. Can you go into just a little bit more of a detail in terms of in the 09 budget, what the cuts represent and really how, what effect they have. And I want you to be honest, and not that you haven't been honest with us, but I know, talk about what you and I have about, closing of some of these facilities and the need not going away. I mean, again, we don't have the funding, but you are being forced to move some folks around in that. So if you could just let the committee know, how that's working and how those hard decisions, came to be made, I would appreciate it.
I can do that, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I sure will. I appreciate the opportunity to come back and have a more in-depth discussion with the committee. As you know, one of our statutory mandates is to provide secure beds for committed kids, and we do this through the operation of our detention centers, our RYDCs and our YDCs, Youth Development Campuses. As you also know, we have operated the short-term program, or sentence now, for several years, previously a 90-day sentence, now a 60-day sentence, and we're seeking this session to reduce it to a 30-day sentence so that it might generate desperately needed beds. The number would be 113 beds. So again, to get us there, we have identified some programs that we consider good programs, and they have served us well, but we're to a point to where something has to go. And we have taken, again, a couple of our wilderness programs and identified those programs to discontinue so that we may continue and provide the kind of beds we need for committed kids that we know will come into DJJ at our Savannah River Challenge program. This is a 150-bed program in 3 50-bed pods that we would take those 50 beds and continue and use 100 of those beds for the short-term sentence youth that are coming into DJJ and the other 50 beds for the long-term offenders that would come in. We have looked at this in many ways, and again, I appreciate the wilderness programs. Representative Green, you and I have had the discussion many times. They're good programs, but I don't know how many different ways I can just make the statement that we have to cut something. Our total cut to DJJ budget is $40 million out of a $341 million operating budget. That amounts to about a 12% cut. And while we have planned for this cut, I'm not seeing a different approach or another way that we can meet our mandate, meet our mission, provide secure beds for committed kids, and do more or even different from what we have proposed to you. But I'm certainly willing to have the discussion and hear from any committee member who may have some thoughts on our budget. But it's essentially what I presented last week in terms of our need to be able to provide secure beds for committed kids that will come into DJJ.
And that's what I know some of our members, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that, are more familiar with these facilities because they're maybe closer to them for home. They may involve employment with people or whatever. None of these are close to me, and so I don't ask for that reason. But I guess what I'm getting at is I asked. I'm going to pick a line in the budget if y'all have it.
Okay,
Commissioner. 29-225. It says eliminate funding for the North Georgia Wilderness Program. There is no vendor, and there will be no request for proposal issued. Okay, so that program isn't ongoing currently. Is that correct?
That's correct. Closed in 2008.
Okay, so what we're doing is we're eliminating the funds for that. Now, in 2008, when it was opened, were there youth there?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get at is, so we're actually, because of these budgets, we just have less youth in the system. Is that? I mean, I'm not.
Yes.
I'm not arguing with you on that. I'm just.
In the case of that particular program, yes. We lost 28 to 30 beds because of that closure. That was an ECHR program, and they elected to no longer provide that service, related, I'm sure, to their ability to make a profit or to survive. But when they elected to make that, to close that facility, we had every intention of rebidding, and actually did rebid.
Right.
We received no vendors in North Georgia, so we were prepared to put it out statewide and even allow the additional wilderness camps, that we have a number, to expand if they were able to do that, to take on these additional kids. But when the budget cuts came, we decided if you're going to have to take these kind of budget cuts, there's $2 million that we're currently finding a way to live without, even though it is 30 less kids. But we were surviving. And so instead of closing something that was operating, we're closing something that's already closed, which was obviously the easier choice for us. But we absolutely lost the bet.
And that's what I guess I want to bring to bear when people are looking at us and we're talking about the budget cuts and the money that we have in the state. I guess I'm going to use your budget and DOC's later because it's a big budget. Is if my math works here at $2,353,000 in change, and 30 youth served in that bed divided by 360, it costs us $187 a day to keep that facility out. I mean, that's just if you divide the numbers. And as we look around sometimes on the competition for these dollars, and people talk about, why it costs so much, and Georgia's budget is $20 billion in 2009. It was only $12 billion at some point a few years ago. There are always things that we can sharpen our pencil, and we're gonna have to do that this year. But I think people need to realize, to the extent that anyone in this room is not aware, that a single facility that Commissioner Murray has to operate that would at maximum house 28 youth costs the state of Georgia $2 million a year. And that's a lot of money. However, I think information serves us that if we don't do something with those young people and try to help them, find their way. They're more apt than not to find their way into Commissioner Owen's system later on in the Department of Correction. But as we're looking at these budget cuts, now I know Representative Green had questions about the specific facilities. Is now time you want to go into that in more detail, Representative, or Chairman Chambers? She had Chairman Chambers.
Okay. Commissioner, would you be so kind as to break down the per diem cost on the different short-term programs that you have?
Yes, I will. I'm going to ask my deputy to help with that.
Okay.
The short-term sentence is a sentence. We house youth at a number of facilities. Two specifically are STP-type facilities, McIntosh, YDC, and Savannah River, YDC. Mm-hmm. McIntosh is a 60-bed facility, and Savannah River is a 150-bed facility. The price at McIntosh is let me get to it right quickly here, $187.92 per day. The cost at Savannah River is, I don't have that in front of me because it's not part of the cut, but it's $163 something per day. And of course, those costs are a little different than what you'd see at a secure operated facility for committed youth or designated felons. It's a completely different type of environment, different kind of kid. So those are the STP beds that are, facilities that are exclusively used for STP. We do have a few STP beds at Macon. That's our girls' facility. Okay. I don't have the cost per day there, but it's more, around $200 probably. And those are the beds we use for STP for the 60-day sentence. What the idea on, it's hard to follow this STP thing, but what the idea is as we move from 60 to 30 days, obviously that frees up about 110 or so beds in that system by going to 30 days.
Is shortening the program for these youths, is that going to be just as effective? Or how do you feel?
Well, what we have heard from the juvenile court judges consistently is that that's an arm that they need for this population of youngsters to have a taste, if you will, of the system without it being a long-term placement. Again, it was 90 days. From the agency standpoint, I'm not sure that we saw a significant difference in the impact on the youth when we moved from 90 to 60. That's debatable and arguable, but from what we could see, the effect is still there. To have it reduced until 30, again, it will give youngsters an opportunity to come into the system. They just won't stay as long. I believe it can be just as effective in a 30-day period as it may be in a 60-day period. And again, it opens up some critically needed beds for us. We're not seeking to eliminate the option. At one time, we thought perhaps that might be a best route for us, but I hear the juvenile court judges loud and clear that that's an option that's very much needed. We want to maintain it. We just need to reduce it.
In previous years, and we've had these conversations for a couple of years now, there were philosophical debates about the program. We believe that it's not that effective. The recidivism rate's very high. We believe there's a better way to treat youth, but obviously it's an option that judges want to have used, very much so, used as a threat so that they don't have to do other things. So we've heard that loud and clear. But again, it does function as one of our least successful approaches to dealing with.
Well, it's not philosophical this year. It's
just about the budget.
Money.
Just about the budget.
Well,
Yes.
If you don't mind, what is the statistical change, if any, on the recidivism rate from when you went from 90 to 60 days? Any at all?
I could follow up with you. I wouldn't have that today.
It's more of a curiosity.
I think it helped a little, but it wasn't significant. But
Okay.
it didn't make it. It wasn't worse. It was better.
Oh, really? Okay.
And some of that is the
how long you have them there, who they're associating with. You know, maybe we're doing less harm. I don't know. It's kind of a shock incarceration. So most young people get the message. If they don't like to be locked up, they don't like to be removed and have their liberties restricted, they get that message fairly quickly and decide this is not something that I want to ever come back to. Others, you know, they've been there, done that.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think that we could actually save some money by keeping these STP beds open in these facilities, as opposed to moving them to a different, higher cost facility?
Well, keeping them in the STP facilities beyond the 30 days?
Oh, no, sir, but just, are we going to actually say that the sentence can only be 30 days?
Yes.
And we mandate that by law, or the judges, judges don't determine that?
Well, the mandate now is up to 60 days.
Up to, okay.
And what we're proposing is that it would be up to 30 days mandated.
It will require legislation.
Right.
And just so I was...
Before we lose that point, does the statute now say up to 60 days or 60 days? It says up to 60 days. Well, and I'm going to let my lawyers chime in here. So and we're getting over in legislation. That's going to come through one of you. You come over there with y'all. Yeah, we're going to come through that. But I mean, we're going to get into the point, because if the judges thought this worked at 30 days, they could be doing that now.
And many do.
Right.
Okay.
Many do.
I mean,
but
many, some don't use it.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
We did change the law 2 years ago, wasn't
it? 2 to 3 years ago.
From 2 to 3. But anyway, from 90 down to 60. And what is the purpose of it, Mr. Chairman? Is it as the Commission says, it's another arm tool for the juvenile courts. The thing they do also, they're trying to find better ways to keep the children in the community, but also under certain type of restraints or restrictions. And we had a meeting about just the beginning of the session with the juvenile court judges to talk about the programs. And one of the things they're going into now that is, I think, a useful tool, and that is the ankle bracelets, where they can keep up with these children by computer. A probation officer can by computer every minute where that child is. And the thought is, the way they're expressing it is, if they put the child under restriction, you're going to be in school or you're going to be home and nowhere else without someone's prior approval. That's kind of where they're trying to find this as a source. It's difficult for some of these more rural communities, because they have not been able to form or fund other systems other than this short-term detention. Your larger communities, Bolton, DeKalb, otherwise, they do have programs locally that they can do. But it's your more rural areas that don't have this as a potential tool other than the short-term detention. That's kind of
I've always supported
statement.
The community having involvement in rehabilitating youth. I fully support that. And again, in better fiscal times, the STP program is not harming children, and certainly it's not problematic to the agency, other than the fact that it's a budget situation this year. It's a matter of what we can afford. We have to have a bed for kids who are committed.
Dale? All right. Commissioner, thank you for what you do and a good job you're doing over at the department. Having been a part of that discussion 2 or 3 years ago on, I guess, decreasing the short-term programs, it was my recollection, or it is my recollection today, that part of the rationale at that time was to free up some resources to use on some community-based programs, I think. what I think I hear you saying today is that that's no longer probably in this climate part of the equation, understandably, but it's being driven by the budget. So I guess I say that to ask this question, and that is, if we don't pass legislation to go down from up to 60 to up to 30, what's the effect on your budget this year or FY10?
Well, I see tremendous crowding coming, Representative Ralston. I see the state of Georgia getting back into a situation where we were 10 to 11 years ago when we operated unconstitutional facilities because of extreme overcrowding. Right now, we are able to manage our beds. We have facilities that operate at capacity, in some cases over capacity, but I'm convinced that we're constitutional. Our facilities will withstand scrutiny from anybody who chooses to look. But if we don't pass the legislation and we don't do something different from what we're doing, we're going to have far more youth coming into DJJ than we have beds for. It'll put us in a really crowded situation. You perhaps have some ideas of the fallout of that if we let ourselves get in that situation again.
Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. You indicated earlier at the beginning of your testimony that you were proposing cuts of $40 million or a little better in your overall budget.
Right.
I guess what I'm specifically wanting to know is how much of that hinges on legislation passing going down to 30 days, or does any of it?
I'm going to defer to Jeff on that. That's probably a little more budget specific.
Yeah, I may have to look at some numbers on 09, but annualized it's about $7.3 or $4 million from the cuts that are related to ST.
And that would be the difference in 60 and 30?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. I also want to follow up that point about the $40 million. You said it's 11% of your budget. And maybe it's been expressed, but I remember you saying at the last hearing where you appeared talking about your 09 cuts. Why is your budget being cut 11% when I thought what we had is going across the board somewhere around 6-7%? You're the highest I've heard. 12%? 12%? And where is that being generated as a proposal for cutting of your budget that much?
Well, I'm not sure I can.
Well, be honest with us. I'm trying to get to an answer.
It does go down to $30 million in the out year, so there's quite a few one-time.
He has open programs, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yeah.
I'll ask Mr. Murdock to
Tell me, but for instance, I think that the open program that's not bid, that $2 million is a one-time thing. That's a program that was not being used now.
Okay.
So I think it doesn't actually take 10% off an ongoing project because it wasn't happening. Is that fair as to where the magnitude?
Well,
In the one-time cuts.
Yeah, the one-time.
Oh, sure.
Yes,
yeah,
all
that is.
Yeah. But that's true with all of them.
But that's in all.
That's all of them. I know everybody's got that cut. We're talking about now, in his case, 12%. I just wonder how are we driving that much out of a budget there's already, I think, it's a necessary. As he points out, we've got issues that the federal courts are going to be addressing if we don't address it as a legislature.
Well, you're speaking of the memorandum of agreement, which we've operated under for a long time, and we've really closed that out. We're waiting now for the Department of Justice to give us our final grade, but. It's important to me, and I hope it's important to all of you, that we not let ourselves get unconstitutional again. There are some things we must do, and we don't have many options as to how we do it in terms of running facilities.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the reasons it's also appears high a little is because of the 30 million cuts in 2010. We're starting many of those cuts this fiscal year. So there's some continuity between 9 and 10. I mean, you could wait in 9 and only start in July, but if you're going to have to eliminate something, we're basically proposing to eliminate it in this fiscal year, and then full year funding cut in the next fiscal year.
And if I can follow up on Chairman Willis, that's the reason I wanted you guys here today, because you have a large budget and you throw out $40 million. I mean, if you look at it, if you go to 29.2, Chairman Willis, the community non-secure commitment, that starts out at $50 million. That is actually taking an $11 million. That's 20%. I mean, when one looks at and says, 12% over the whole budget, I think it's real important that you look down. Now, this is something that Representative Green and a number of people are interested in, but of that, I believe you said annualized $7 million of that is statutory in nature. Some take the position that the 30-day short-term program is better than the 60. It's certainly more cost efficient. Others may not, but I would like this committee to look at dollars and programs and effect on Georgia, and only look at the 12% or 20% to bring attention to it, which your question did. It was excellent to bring that attention. But if you look down, and for instance, 29.232, recognized savings from health services paid to care management organizations. That's just we hope that's just a systemic savings. That doesn't take anything away from the care of the folks, because that's happening across, with those savings are being recognized in care maintenance organizations of medical services that are being provided by the state for non-incarcerated folks. That's just a savings we're looking at. Is that not true? I mean, that's a projected savings.
Yeah,
but it shows up on our.
Yeah, we had here's. That's why it's hard to answer. In the previous fiscal year, when we started this room and board watchful oversight, the idea was that we would have some kids served. Their mental health treatment would be provided by the mental health services, either through the care management organizations, through the state mental health agency, many with this Medicaid funding. What we set aside on some projections were an amount of money to pay the match.
Right.
And what it looks as if is that most of those kids end up being care management organization kids, not state kids, so we end up not having to pay the match. In order to get the $3 million in that fiscal year that we thought we were going to have to pay the match, we reduced the number of youth in care.
Right.
So we've taken a cut already. The money's now freed up, but we had to take the cut to free it up. But we took it in a previous fiscal year. So there's still, I guess what I'm saying is there's still a little pain there.
Tell me, Jeff.
Just pain we've already taken.
On 29.26, interesting, Chairman Willis' question brings it up. Recognize one-time prior year saving. That's what you're talking about, is it not?
Well, that was the care management.
Right.
Recognize one-time contract. There's a number of things going on in there with hundreds of contracts, but a lot of that is utilization control. What we're looking at is trying to move where we haven't already done so to 95% of utilization. So if you have a contract for 100 beds, you try to keep it at 95 so that you can save a little bit of money. You can't do that long term because the vendor will suffer a great deal over an extended period of time and not be able to stay in business. But we can do that one time. We also had some, for example, we're taking it in a separate line item with North Georgia, but for an example, there was some money left over at North Georgia because we didn't rebid at the end of last fiscal year. So we're using those old purchase orders and spending that, for example, in July of this year, extending the contracts and using some of that. Once we do that, we've done that, and the money's gone. So it's one-time cuts.
And this is going to
no major impact.
This begs this question. Assuming this budget situation had not occurred and you had not been asked to make these reductions, where would that money have gone?
Well, some of our larger contracts we actually do contract at 95%. That we don't contract, we budget at 95%, assuming that throughout the course of the year you'll have some ups and downs and so on. Many times when we're under pressure population-wise, they actually are at 100%. So we use that money to shore up our revenues so that we can make those payments at 100%. So it's basically a cushion, created from year to year to year.
I'm not sure
that allows you to go to 100% when you're actually budgeted at 95 in some cases.
We would have not liked to come
That's
back
weird.
to have another discussion about the short-term program this year, Mr. Chairman, if we were not in the budget situation that we're in.
Well, and that I hear what you're saying, but part of me is bothered by that, and that's just a philosophical part of me. Either it's good to go to 30 days, it's good for the kids to go to 30 days, or it's not. And, I think Chairman Willard believes, and it's worked a good mix of people, that's a good thing. I just don't want us to. That's a philosophical thing. I don't want us to make a policy change or a statute change based on fiscal constraint. I mean, I know that's the chair. You have to say,
Yeah.
I don't envy you that position, but it's either good policy. It's like Director Keenan the other day wanted to close the crime lab because they were not efficient, but sat and told he was robbing from the supply to keep it open because we like well, if it's not efficient, we ought to close it. If it's good, we ought to be trying to figure out a way to keep it open long term. We shouldn't put you in that sentence. No, Chairman Chambers has a question. Let me ask you, do we have space in our short-term programs now? So there's a line, if you will, there's a line to get in? I mean, if a judge were to send somebody to a short-term program today, do we have a space for them? Well, it may put a facility over 100% or something, but yes.
I mean, in general,
Yes,
there's not a
Generally speaking, well, we have kids on hold, but again, we try to accommodate the courts, and if
that's part of the legislation from before. They get credit for time served, so they.
But I mean, yeah, I mean, I know there's a movement around, and you got to find the right place for them. But in general, we're part of it.
in general, but there is a waiting list. There's always a waiting list for the short-term program. I need to make that clear.
Okay. Is the state funding these short-term programs totally other than what Fulton and DeKalb, and we've got our own programs in Fulton and DeKalb? The state funds it all for everybody, every single county.
Well, it's available to every county.
Okay.
Every county doesn't use it, but it's available.
Okay. So are there any counties where judges are convicting these youths and putting them in these short-term programs at a higher ratio than some other counties are?
Yes.
Different than population, maybe not, or is there just some juvenile judges who just like that program tremendously, I guess?
That's fair to say. They see, I guess, more value than their colleagues, and they use it much more frequently than other juvenile court judges.
Are there any counties that are kicking in any part of the cost on any of this?
None at all.
None at all. No counties kicking in any dime towards these short-term programs that their own juvenile court judges are using or recommending. That might be a way that we can offset some of this too. I'm not starting a mandate.
Therein lies the thing. We won't call that a mandate we won't call it a mandate the other direction when the state troopers write the citations and the counties keep the money. That's not a reverse mandate. I have, and we want to get through this. We have about an hour left in our meeting time. Talk to me about this, Mr. Commissioner. You have X number of beds out there that are, if you will, small, medium, and large. I mean, where you have the hard beds that you have to people,
right.
Secure custody beds, and then while they're waiting on trial, that you have to keep them. And you have the short-term beds. You have you run most of those within your department. It's really just the short-term programs that are outsourced. Is that correct?
Well, the secure custody beds are all within the department, and the short-term programs, most of those beds are contract beds. Not all of them, but most of them are.
Okay. Do you have any opportunity, and I may know the answer to this before I ask, but because of the occupancy rate, if you will, you don't really have an opportunity to do any sort of a consolidation. I mean, you don't have the opportunity that the Department of Corrections had, where you had a non-enduring facility where you had room to move people and then get more efficient. You don't have that. That's not really available to you.
You mean Department of Corrections facilities that might be available for?
Well, no, the Department of Corrections had some non-enduring facilities they were able to close and still handle the because of the fast track beds, and they were able to do that. You don't really have that option with your facilities around the state. You need them all, correct?
Absolutely.
Now the question I have is, do you have any opportunity to expand the capacity within some of these other programs so that we can, have a wider, more efficient
use of the hard bed? I mean, do you have any short-term folks that are occupying facilities in what you're talking about is secure beds? You have short-term program people in those, if you will, secure beds.
You're speaking of taking one facility and
Today, as you exist, you have short-term people in what you're referring to as hard beds, secure beds.
yes, we do.
All right. And those hard beds, are they not more expensive to operate than the short-term facilities? That's a generalized statement.
Typically,
Some may not be
yes.
is a typical thing. Close, secure prisons
Yeah,
are more expensive to operate than medium secure.
That's true to say.
Okay, so here's my question. If we were looking at this and trying to right-size the accommodation of youth, and when I say this, if someone's in short-term, to put them into a short-term facility, why would we not look at keeping those out in a lesser expensive facility and cutting the number of people into the I'm trying to understand why we're going the other direction.
Well,
we're closing the short-term facility, but we've got some short-term people we need. And I understand we're trying to change that by statute, but until we change that by statute, we're taking up a secure bed with them. We may get ourselves in a situation where we're overcrowding secure facilities and getting into non-compliance with the
I think I can.
Yeah, there are some dollar and cents reasons for that.
For an example, we have 20 short-term beds at Augusta, YDC, which is our basically our mental health facility. These are youth that are short-term sentenced youth, but have serious mental health issues. We put them there because we can handle them there, versus a private facility where they cannot handle them there. So there's almost no way to. That's where they need to be for the days that we have them. They need to be in that type of environment with that kind of treatment option, because it would really jeopardize the mission of a place like McIntosh. They just could not handle that type of a youth. So that's a little bit of the answer. The only other place in a secure bed an STP youth is sentenced or placed is at Macon, and they're girls. And we have our girls program all in one facility, and we use some beds there for short term. So it'd be very difficult to do that as well.
I'll cover my position. Except where, because of the system,
then they're
special needs, you don't have short term, or in the case with the gender specific requirement maybe, and the special needs for mental health, you don't have short term folks in.
That's right.
That's right.
And
that changes.
And before, a few years ago when we had that other bill, we did have short-term kids mixed with in secure facilities with designated felons. That was a big problem for us, and that bill allowed us to not do that anymore, which was great.
Many have any further questions? I still, as we go through this, and if there's no additional questions from the committee, we'll let it go for this for today. I still would like Representative Green as an interest in it. Chairman, I don't know if you and Chairman Austin, I know y'all both been interested in that in the past. If y'all have the time, given the other committee requirements and needs, I would like for the three of you to work with the commissioner and to see how it goes through the correct statutory information that we come forward, and also assure that we are, with Ms. Murdoch's help in the budget office, that we are operating as frequently as we can and bring that back to us.
If I just comment quickly, Mr. Chairman, one of the differences between juvenile justice and Department of Corrections, DLC doesn't accept a prisoner until they want to. I mean by that, they're at the jail in the county until a bed or a placement is processed through and made available. Juvenile justice doesn't have that choice. They take every time there is a child put into detention. They have to take it. So the bed's either there or they got to do something to accommodate it. Is that correct?
Thank you for pointing that out. We
That's
do
the
not
difference.
control our front gate, and we have to
Yeah.
take children as the court sends them to. That's a big difference between
Yeah.
the two agencies. Thank you, Representative.
Any further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank all of you.
Department of Corrections, page 14 of 59.
Welcome back.
Good evening. Thank you.
We wanted to do this, and we're completing our afternoon, but you guys had brought some things before us, and you have a large number, and we wanted to go down through the questions sort of on a line-by-line issue and let the committee answer any questions. If you have anything you'd like to spread upon the minutes or the proceedings before we start, give you the opportunity to do that.
No, sir. If it's pleasure the committee, will drive on.
All right. Does the committee have any questions that they wanted to get in? And we called them all back here. Y'all wanted to talk to them. Don't. Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, let's talk about the closing of the fire stations.
Yes, sir.
What is the? I really don't understand where we're going to actually be saving on this. As I've looked at the budget and looked at what the state has put into this, and they're located on the in the prisons there. I know you stated this is not part of the corrections mission, but it has become part of the community's commission, and as far as bringing these into the prisons, into the communities, and at the same time protecting the prison itself.
Yes,
from
sir.
fires.
I think it goes back to Chairman Chambers' question the other day when she asked what was the most difficult part of the budget reductions that you took, and clearly that's it. Fundamentally, when you're taking a look at core mission, and those are tough questions to ask because those fire programs have been around the state for a long, long time and do a lot of good things, and we train a lot of inmates, but I guess the best way I can answer your question is kind of like the inmate work details. Historically, we've offered inmate work details free over the decades to our rural communities, and that model kind of changed in the last several years. Well, now we ask the local community to cover the cost of the correctional officer, not the cost of the inmate work detail. And in return for paying the $40,000 or so, which includes fringe benefits for the correctional officer, we'll provide a county work detail for 50 weeks out of the year to a county. I see this along the same model, where I want to continue to partner with that, but in these tough economic times, I don't think the state can bear that cost. We'll continue to provide training for the inmates. We'll provide the fire stations, but we'd have to ask the local communities to pick up the cost of the fire chief, which is essentially a correctional lieutenant. Tough decision to make, particularly in rural areas, but, sir, I'd argue it's the right decision.
And if the county, like some of my poor counties, cannot afford to, because they already have a fire chief, they already pay him one there,
yes, sir.
and that's hard enough, then where does that leave the protection of the prison in case of a fire?
We'd still have to maintain some fire services for internal. Again, the same model as the K-9s we talked about, where that kind of had some mission creep there. So we're trying to contain the cost because the core mission is running the prison. We want those inmates trained, if there is a fire breakout in one of those prisons, to respond to the prison. But we can't get into the situation like we are now, where 70 to 80% of the calls are going to the rural community and not serving the basic mission of the prison.
But still, we're not. If we're going to do that, we would still not have the savings there.
We wouldn't have the size of the fire operation that we currently have, nor perhaps would need that senior staffing. This is something that's got to be worked out. But if I can address your earlier question, too, or your earlier statement, they cannot afford to do it. You know, what we've done with other counties, realizing how difficult it is to go from non-paid work details to all of a sudden, some rural counties in Georgia have a hard time coming up with $40,000. I mean, I know that. We've got counties out there whose entire county budget maybe is $4 or $5 million at that, so they have a hard time. We might work with phasing this program in, like we've done with some of these work details, pay half of it this fiscal year, then next year go to the full thing. So I clearly realize that shutting down those fire engines and shutting the doors of that station are going to cause some problems, so we'd work with individual communities to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Sir.
Commissioner, what is on your submission for 09, and I know we said not to go into 10, but just in 09 then, to shut down the fire operation, what does that save us?
640, I think, 680, 600,000. You don't mind
is that in several like different programs? I mean, it's not in a single line. That's what makes sometimes these things hard to read.
It's actually $615,448.
Okay, where do you have that off a different sheet, or you
I do.
Okay.
I have it off a combined sheet that we do.
Okay, you want to provide? I mean, I don't mean that to be a smart question. Can you provide that for us when you get a chance?
Oh,
not today, not today. To where I know sometimes are you getting that off your PeopleSoft?
No, we just did a spreadsheet where we combined the items.
Cause I think that would help us to understand those things, because I know you, especially the way the government did it. Governor did this and did these roll-ups. I think that would be helpful.
We'd be happy to.
To this, tell me. You mentioned the K-9 unit, so it gets back to this. I know that was one of the things. We had those, and we had the K-9s, and we had the officers trained to use them, and we cut those back.
Yes, sir.
What happened to the puppies?
No, that's a great question.
I care for the dogs, but I care for the value of them. And did we work with county law enforcement to get those in there? I mean, was that a bid process? Did we do a reverse auction on those?
No,
was
sir.
Everybody given the opportunity to?
Yes, sir.
That?
That's exactly what we did. We didn't put those out to bid. We worked with our local law enforcement agencies. Those that wanted to take one of the trained K-9s, we just donated the K-9 to them, but we also offered some training services to them. I got to tell you, though, as a father of a 12 and 11-year-old, I tried to adopt one of those drug dogs to be my pet, but they said I couldn't do that. But
well, no, I wonder. We were equitable then in the way we made those K-9s available around the state?
I believe so, sir, but I can't drill down very far for you because I don't know for sure.
We'll take that up later. I just know
in the past, at the local level, we used to think the training and the acquisition of a dog, and I know that they are trained with different things.
That's right.
If you will, your standard police dog security.
That's right.
Dog, you have a drug one that specializes in drugs, and you have one also that specializes in explosive detection.
That's correct.
There may be other specialties.
Escape and cadaver, tracking, and then cadaver.
All those, but I know that we used to think that was at least a $10,000 investment.
Oh, easily.
Was purchased and trained and
easily. Yes, sir.
Non-trivial expense. I think most of those puppies were probably treated better than I am when I go home on weekends. If I recall the way our officers treated them, they were like, I don't say like family. I think
they are family. Absolutely, they are family.
I said probably. I promise, Commissioner, this is not a trick question. I mean, it's no secret that I am thrilled with building administrative office space last year, and especially in these down budget times. But how are we realizing $1.3 million in savings in FY09 that is listed here in the governor's recommendation is when we consolidate training activities? How are we getting any savings in 09 when we're not training people?
That's a great question. I'm not so sure that's the best label of that document, to be honest with you. What we made the decision to do early on this fiscal year, we know we were looking at a 6, 8, or 10% reduction. So I think I talked to you earlier about the committee, how we went through the exercise of the zero-based budget exercise for a couple of days. By no means a true zero-based budget. It would take days and weeks and weeks in a $1.2 billion budget with 13 programs to do that. But we realized that in 2010, fiscal 2010, we would be consolidating to TIF. We knew that we were going to have a hard hiring freeze. And I think I told you all before, I think we've only hired 40 or 60 correctional officers since August. with a 10,000 person staff, only hiring 40 or 60 is a tough deal. So we shut down our regional academies. We had, I believe, 4 regional academies, and we did the same thing with a reduction in force through attrition. We shut those operations down, and then we put those trained officers, they started out as correctional officers, probation officers anyhow, just gradually become trainers. So we put them in vacant roles in our prisons, in our probation offices, and shut down those regional academies to garner those savings.
So we do that whether we were going to TIF.
Wouldn't have been quite as quick to do that, sir, if we weren't going to consolidate at TIFT. We'd have to sit back. Not right now. You're right. I wouldn't have kept them totally open, but I wouldn't have shut them down now. Not with a 22% turnover. Eventually, we're going to start hiring correctional officers again. But your point's well taken.
Well, I hate to say it like that. And again,
I know that.
My stance on that is well documented. So I'm just trying to find out the difference between having those and not having those. Whether you train your folks to JIP 6 or TIF. You either have them or you don't.
That's right.
So I fail to see the move to TIF has anything to do with
the only difference was, to your point about you're going to have to train them eventually, regardless. I would have shut them down, but I would have kept the keys, and I would have maintained the utilities, and I would have kept the staff on standby for eventually retraining. But we made this decision to totally shut them down, and no going back.
On 17, going 13, if you have our document, it just says reduction in force, 150 positions.
Yes, sir.
But only lists $353,000. We weren't paying those folks much money.
That's in the admin portion of our admin.
That's one of the places where it didn't say.
It goes over. Every program has that reduction.
Because normal, well, is that consolidated, Ms. East, which line did that consolidate in with the governor's recommendation? Do you know?
I believe that's over $6 million total for the department.
Right, that's fine. I know the way when we open a fast track bed, you put $38 in administration.
Right.
It's spread out. Formula thing. Okay, that makes sense. I just see numbers like this and they make me do stuff. I'm sorry. How long you've been up here since like 7 o'clock, and you do get this time of day? Your mind sometimes when your mouth. Look, there's no way to ask this without just asking. And somebody is one of those line letters, and you don't have to pause that much. It's not nearly that bad. But in these budget times, I got one of these letters that told me, and I'm hoping you're going to tell me it's wrong, that during these budget times that your predecessor had 2 people that the main function in life was to drive him around the state of Georgia. Was that the case?
No.
Okay. Was there someone assigned, or did he have someone?
Employees assigned.
And was there an employee assigned to drive the commission? And I'm going to ask the same question as you sit there. Do you have somebody assigned to drive you?
I do not.
Okay. Was there someone assigned to drive you? Did he have a driver?
No, not specifically a driver. He had somebody that did get him to most locations, but he had other duties and responsibilities to include public affairs. He did public affairs work, so that was a sideline job. But I will tell you, though, quite honestly, there needs to be a post-certified officer somewhere around that office, and that's what that role was.
And I'm going to agree with you on that. I mean, there's been times when the Commissioner of Fulton County had someone, and sometimes Commissioner Chairman of Fulton County needed a post-certified officer in order to make sure they got the places on time.
But the answer is no, sir.
Okay, that's good to know. And it's like I said, it's just a question that needed to be asked. For the record, if people send me emails, it's always a lot better if they would put their name on it.
I get those emails too.
I understand. Tell me, we reduced the funding for motor vehicle purchases, 17,120. How many vehicles does this represent, and how many more are we purchasing that we didn't reduce?
We actually have $438,146 total in base funding that was appropriated for motor vehicle purchases. That's about 20 to 25 vehicles per year, which our fleet is around 2,000. So that's mainly replacing 1% of our fleet per year.
We gave
412 of it back, so if we buy a car for
Well, we actually gave all of it back.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's just split up between the different programs.
Oh, gotcha.
Mhm.
There I go with that program. Okay. Is there any of that we, as we get in these budgetary plans, remember what we said earlier, that, the only good thing that comes out, out of these is really looking at, what do we need? Do we have vehicles out there in places that we don't need them anymore, or we needed them in one place? And, even if it's, there's something out there that's costing us a fortune to maintain, and we need to be better off. Not only do we not need to do it, we don't even need to try to. Are y'all looking at?
We're already looking at that. Obviously, this has caused us to take a good hard look at our fleet and to look at the mileage, to look at the repairs, the amount of the repairs, what the vehicles are being used for. Unfortunately, we can take the hit for right now, but we can't continue this forever. Obviously, our vehicles will need replacement sometime down the road. But we have made some adjustments for this year, and that will carry us into next year. And we're trying to use our fleet strategically and make the most of what we have.
I think you answered this earlier. You're going to get us the information on the reduction in force and how those positions were calculated, right?
Yes, sir. It was a pro-rata. It's prorated across the programs.
What positions are this?
We did not specifically name positions.
Well, have they been, were they gone?
The RIF that was included in the 10% package?
Yeah.
No, sir.
Is the number still good? Are
Um,
you not going to list them? And again, this is just questions. I'm not jumping at you, but if the $6 million was good, if they were ripped at what point?
Earlier in the year, not now.
So the $6 million is not good.
No, sir. And that was actually in our 10% package, so it was not part of the 6% that we actually went forward and implemented in the beginning.
But it's what we have in here now.
The governor did not recommend the RIF of the 150 positions.
I might add, Mr. Chairman, if I may, too. As we pointed out earlier, we've actually reduced our force by over 1,200 live bodies already as we've gone through this process.
Wow. All right. I know you got a lot of people on this. 1.2. But if you recommend 150 positions at $6 million, you had some, and I know it's your personal thing, it's a personal matter. I'm going to get down to, this person.
I can tell you how we came up with it. We took an average salary for GDC with fringes, and we figured out how much we needed.
So
And that's
these RIFs, these RIFs were security personnel?
these RIFs were across all personnel, and they were in our 10% package, so the least desirable of the options. This RIF would be in addition to, as the Commissioner mentioned, we have a net loss of 1,200 positions since July 1. That includes the 878 that we have abolished and lost from closing facilities and doing other things. And then on top of that, in our operating reduction, the austerity reduction that we have in here, over $24 million, 19.6 of that is in personal services. That equates to 420 positions. And those have been a RIF through attrition. So we have lost over 1,200, and we'll sustain that.
Well, and we'll get to that more. We'll get more to that offline then. But at that point, the governor didn't take any of these cuts that you put forward in the 10% option, although the numbers that we're looking at, the information I get, we're not going to like January revenues, and so we're going to like perhaps where we're at even less. So I would, I guess, ask the commissioner, you, Brian, the commissioner, and Steve, whoever it is that on your team has to pull those together, and I would take that amount of money and go find specific places where you can continue to make the department in a reverse order of everybody's important, but in a reverse order of the critical nature, and be prepared to talk about that, in a personnel appropriate manner.
Sure.
To involve people's it's an unfortunate
tell me, because, and again, that's not part of the governor's recommendation, just for the community, for sure. Tell me about the private prison and the CPI and where we're at there. I know when we had the conversation sometime previously, your predecessor intimated that the agreement or conversations were being had with those folks on that. My information is those conversations that he intimated were being had actually started about an hour and a half after we got out of that meeting. But whatever the case, that they are being had. Where are we with that? What percentage of that are we really going to be able to realize? I'll just be honest with you, I find it hard to believe that if we haven't gotten an agreement within seven months now this year, and we could have been working this agreement back in last July, August, that they're going to actually write us a check now. How much of this $2 million are we going to see?
100% of it.
And you're going to do that how?
Well, actually, one of our private providers that we've started reducing their payment basically from July 1st. They just operated on the old rate from FY08. So one provider's not been an issue. The other one we have been in heavy negotiations with. They are very amenable, have actually offered us a proposal that we have right now that I believe we are all good with and we're going to move forward with. We've had some good negotiations with them. They have they certainly understand our situation and what's going on in the state of Georgia, and being a good partner, they have really stepped up to the plate, and we will be able to realize 100% of that.
Okay, I'm doing the math here.
Not to
undercut your position at all, but if it were all linear, it's about $7 million a month for both providers. The total outlay for private, I'm just going $85 million.
Okay.
Total contract.
Okay. Yes.
The
Total.
Contract,
Mm-hmm.
I'm pulling over about $7 million a month. So if they're half and half, I don't think they exactly providers aren't equal.
No, they're not.
But if they were, so it would be about $1 million from each. So somewhere down the last end, if you get down, if you do it all the last month, somebody's going to take about a 16% hit in their contract. I just want to make sure that if they get 16% less, that all their people understand that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, they have been great to work with. I mean, they came up with a wonderful proposal that actually works out for both parties.
Okay. I'm just kind of turning the page here. For the committee, we were able to get these folks to come back and make sure we did. Tell me, somebody also mentioned that we're changing the way we're operating Food and Farm. Food and Farm's going over to Georgia Correctional Industries.
The staff of Food and Farm is going over to Georgia Correctional Industries. That's correct.
What's
The rationale behind it?
I was just saying, forgive me for not knowing
No.
what that means.
No.
What does that mean?
You know, Chairman, Georgia Correctional Industries, roughly a $28 million annual state-owned corporation. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But we're working on that, though. By the way, I learned about that one the other day. If you take a look at the southern states, virtually all southern states place Food and Farm under correctional industries. We've never been able to figure out where in the world to put Food and Farm. We've had them under the prison system, but they're not really prison. We've had them under the admin division over the past few years. So we just thought it'd be a better fit functionally to place Food and Farm underneath correctional industries because they're really neither core mission, but they can support each other. So there's no better explanation than that. It seems to be a better fit.
It's really just not a budget thing. It's
No.
more of a management.
That's right.
Do you lose, therefore, do we lose any sort of an oversight?
No, sir.
For their fines or their people?
No, sir. The way the statute's set up, the Board of Corrections appointed by the governor serves as the Board of Directors not only for the Department of Corrections, but also for Georgia Correctional Industries. They actually will come out of their role during a meeting as the Board of Commissioners for Corrections, go into the Board of Commissioners for Georgia Correctional Industries, and they oversee that program. They then I serve as CEO of both.
Georgia Correctional Industries, are they self-sustaining?
Yes, ma'am. They get no state appropriations.
They actually make a profit?
They do for some years. This year it doesn't look like they're going to do very good this year. But they generate that right back into any other industry, into equipment, manufacturing, trucks, computers, whatever it may be. They have to stand on their own.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am. That's right. That's right.
So now, let me say, they have to stand on their own. So the fact that
Food and Farms over there will now be buying things from them.
We can, yes, do that. They can, Food and Farm can purchase from them and vice versa, if that's your question.
No, I'm just Food and Farm operations where Food and Farm is where we actually get some of the things that we used to.
Yes, sir.
In the prison.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now Food and Farm is under GCI.
Yes, sir.
So now, is there going to be a?
This budget where we're writing a check to Georgia Correctional Industries, because Georgia Correctional Industries is going to be paying the people that.
I want to say no, but let me defer to Becky to make sure before I say that.
The way we did work it out was a contractual agreement, so technically we will be writing them a check, but there's no profit margin built into that.
Okay, but we have to cover their. I mean,
We're covering the expenses to provide the food for the inmates.
And which, how many people have we moved over? I'll get to that.
I don't know the exact number.
Well, here's what I want to make sure we
Mhm.
get away from. This is the most efficient way to run the railroad. I'm not going to get in the way of it. You get to say it. What I want to make sure we didn't do is that we didn't move these folks over there, with their salaries and benefits and so forth. The state employees went without a raise this year. The corrections officers didn't get the raise that this committee recommended and the legislature wanted to give them. I want to make sure we don't put folks over there at Food and Farm that decide that they can't get raises and just go on about the regular course of business, and they build those into the price of food, which we have to write in the check, and so they get to play by different set of rules. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but
it may not happen. It may not. In reality, I just want to make sure. I know it's the same board. I know that right now I know that there's two retirement systems. And there's one for the university system, one for state employees.
It's like healthcare.
Actually, I meant to say healthcare. And they're supposed to be they started out all the same, and now the university system is a whole bunch of different lines. I want to make sure that these folks that move over to GCI don't find themselves in a better position than those once they left with corrections to do a final job as well.
We'll provide you with a number that are going over to GCI and also ensure that that situation doesn't happen. Yes, sir. It's a good point.
Just by moving over there, all of a sudden they got their, believe it or not, let's put this in here. I heard since our last meeting that there were actually raises given out in some of our judicial systems that we did not know about. Yes,
Mr. Chairman, if GCI makes a profit, where does the profit stay? Does it go back into the general fund?
It stays with them, but I'll let them see.
it does stay with them normally. There have been 2 years, and this is one of them, that the actual appropriations bill does include a payment to Treasury from GCI. And so that will happen this year, and I believe it happened about 4 years ago. Okay, yes.
Okay. Well, if you'll remember, Mr. Chairman, last year we realized that there was a plan with some of the Tift College rehab to bond out furniture or to pay with bonds for furniture manufactured by GCI. And if they're making a profit, shouldn't that profit go back into the prison system rather than the general treasury? Or to offset some of the costs for treatment or what have you? Because it's a private corporation, we can't do that.
You can't dedicate it.
Chairman, it does indirectly go back there because the core mission of GCI is not to manufacture to make a profit. It's to train inmates.
Right.
I mean, that's the number one mission, is to train inmates in job skills that might be perhaps transferable. So there is no direct.
Yes, I said it pays for itself,
Yes,
plus
ma'am.
some. But
Yes,
yeah,
ma'am.
I mean, that's funds they could use for medical care or education or what have you.
There's only 6 or 8 people.
Any further questions?
I know we have some difference. Can you talk to, if we don't have time to talk to them all today, besides the fact that the governor didn't take the reduction in force that you offered, there's some other differences in closures, and can you talk to us about the differences of what you offered and what the governor didn't take, or things that the governor took?
Actually, talks about closing more state prisons. I believe probably the next couple of items you would be referring to gets into our 8 and 10% plan, which actually referred to closing some additional PDCs and some additional state prisons. Right now, and I believe I can express the sentiment of the department, I know that you realize the jail backlog that we're looking at right now and the situation with our bed space. We did not feel like we could move any further and close any additional facilities with the demand for bed space that we have right now. And that's exactly why we did not put them in our 6% package and move forward with closing any additional facilities.
Okay, but the governor didn't.
No, sir. No.
You did not either.
No.
Never mind. I'm looking at a place for their grants and wisdom, they just consolidated your reduction
Okay.
with other lines. So if we had to do that, you fear your backlog would get larger?
Yes, sir.
Probably get more to it again, but we've done these fast tracks you talked about, and they seem, they seem to go up fast, but, and I can't remember doesn't one of the private facilities have some beds that we could be using that we are not?
Yes, sir. It's my understanding that the private prison is D. Ray James in Folkston, Georgia. Built some speculative beds. That's one of the options on the RFP that we put out for expansion. I assume that they're going to give us a cost per bed very, very shortly when we take a look at that.
Here's my question. I mean, this is, you can feel free, for the other guy already. Mark, you can take his position as well. Here's the problem. Here's the question. Those beds have been sitting there vacant since at least this time last year. Or they weren't quite ready this time last year.
I don't think so. I'm not sure when. I don't know the answer to that question, sir. I don't know.
In any case, I'll just ask you, you're new in the chair over there. Shouldn't we get out of this bricks and mortar business and let other folks build these things for us if we can?
Yes and no. I agree with you.
Well, I mean, I know there are those that we don't want to get on close security and so forth.
We'd love to give those, but those aren't the ones that those aren't the ones that they want.
And I think from a policy situation, you say
Yeah.
we need
Yeah.
to stay.
Yes, sir.
I just think about all the bricks and mortar that we have to put in the facility if there's a private company that wants to come in and spend that money. Because even these fast track beds that we put online, what is the general cost of the one?
I believe it's somewhere around $5 million for 256 beds.
I mean, if you really $200,000 a bed, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
No, well, that's using that. That's actually using it.
Yes.
Existing. So,
Yes.
So we could do those. Do this. I mean, do you have a mission that we're going to go forward on to get some of these done? Because I know heretofore it's been a bond package to build the thing, even for a fast track, but it's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have something that we can do and actually build for fixing this backlog in a cost-efficient manner without regard to who operates the facility in the most cost-efficient manner?
If I understand your question correctly, it matters not to me whether it's a private vendor or whether it's the State Department of Corrections. What I'm looking for is who can do the mission and what's the best value for the state. I think it's the best way that I can summarize it. Now, I think you pointed out, sir, that the close security inmates, the mentally ill inmates, the seriously dangerous violent inmates, those are going to default to the state. Because there's no market out there for the private prison providers. I'm a big fan of private prisons. I would suggest, sir, we included in your committee the other day an executive summary, and you've seen it before from last year, of where we go forward, and we're just about tapped out on fast tracks. Remember, our master plan said you can fast track existing facilities on existing infrastructure without moving wire, and it's a good value. If you guys start moving wire at state prison facilities or adding infrastructure, then we lose our value in constructions. We've got 4 we're going to open up this year. I think we've got 3 construction funded for next year, and I think there may be 3 to 5 additional total. Then our existing state prisons are tapped. I would suggest we do a parallel process, sir. We go ahead and do our funding for our fast track so that we can hold those inmates that there is not a private market for, but at the same time do exactly what we're doing, RFP to expand existing private prisons, RFP for a new private prison expandable up to 2,500, and if I may, that master plan also said we need to take down 8 state facilities. We've taken down 4, and I think we need to take down the remaining 4 when we get the capacity, whether it's state capacity or private capacity, and when we get that jail backlog at a manageable level. I would love to take down 4 additional state prisons and turn that capacity over to our private prison providers, or even a new private prison provider.
Tell me how we're doing on those RFPs, because those are something else we've been doing my hardest.
And I'm going to let Ms. East answer that question. Let me tell you, Chairman, not intentionally. I think I've talked to you one-on-one, kept arm's length, because they're going to bring them to me for a decision. And if I were too deeply involved in the development of that RFP and answering questions, I don't think I could render a good decision. So if I may, I'm going to defer to Ms. East.
And I know,
And she's got some dates for you, I believe, sir.
I swear I clearly remember being told as we were leaving last March that thing was on the streets are very close. And I don't think it went out until November.
It did not go out until later last year. I'm sure you can appreciate all the work that goes into it. And our main priority when we put that on the street was to make sure that we did all the legwork up front so that we wouldn't have or give any vendor a reason to come back and be able to protest the process in which we used to put it out on the street. So we were very cautious about that up front, and I think that will benefit us in the long run. The expansion RFP has already closed. And we are actually in the very final stages of that. We allowed the vendors to come back in and clarify a few issues for us and give us a best and final offer. That's been done, and we expect to take a recommendation to the commissioner late next week. The new bed facility is on the street now. We've had the pre-bid conference, and we do leave that one open a little bit longer just because of the capital cost you're talking about. It's a monumental for them to pull this together for the vendors. We had a great response at the pre-bid conference. I believe there were around 5 to 7 vendors that were actually interested, and that one closes at the end of February. So I would expect that we'll have a period of evaluation after that, and by the end of March we should have the final recommendation.
I would like it to be good, and there may not be an option to expand past the responses you've had. The turnout thing. Everyone should know I'm not trying to say anything this community in any way spoil that art. So if you're even talking about it while it's out, I mean, should we not even talk about it at all, or you have the proposal, right?
You know what? I am actually not privy to that information.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure. I don't care. I don't care who gets it. I really don't. But my question is this: if we were doing an expansion RFP and we only have three private prisons, right? There's actually 3 in the state.
And 2 vendors. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
I mean, if you're not one of those guys, you can't be expanded.
That's correct.
So I just ask you this in the future. We may get a 3rd vendor that may win this next match. I don't care. But I just asked you it took entirely too long to do that prison expansion. I mean, they're there. You either build more on them. I mean, in my opinion, it just took entirely too long. I don't see how that took as long as it did. So I would just say if there's any sort of statutory change that we need to do, because you have, pardon the pun, a pretty captive audience that may be bidding to expand these in the future. Let's make it. Let's do that, because to me it's ridiculous. We should have been in a position where you could have awarded those expansion opportunities, in July or August last year instead of the RFP only getting out in November. The commissioner not even getting an opportunity to see it yet. So, I don't know that that's going to come up anytime soon, because I guess they expand where they're at, so they may not have the ability to expand any further. But I'm just concerned that we hamstring. I mean, we want the best value for Georgia taxpayers, but this is not like going out and buying paper plates from because there's an infinite number of vendors and a different number of colors. This is pretty cut and dry. Either they can do it and it's cost effective, or they can't and it's not. And you guys can decide.
I understand your point, sir. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, let me ask, may I please follow up on that point? I'm looking at line 17, 12, 11, closing 9 state prisons. Are these being closed as a means of a budget reduction, or are they being closed as being no longer considered useful? What's driving that? What's the disconnect when I hear we're not able to take prisoners from local jails to the state because we don't have capacity, et cetera?
Sir, that refers to if we had to go to a 10% budget reduction rather than the 6.1%. The only way we could get there would have been to close down additional state facilities.
So it's not something actually going to happen?
That's not the governor's recommendation, no, sir.
That we know of. Okay.
That I know of, no, sir.
If I may
Remember, sir, we were asked to submit a 6, 8, and a 10. So some of these things you see are in the 8 and 10.
This is a 8 and 10
yes, sir.
proposal?
Yes, sir.
If I may ask another question, Chair. Back on your closing of or eliminating the regional training academies, how many do we have?
I believe it was 4.
4? Geographically located?
Yes, sir. Northeast.
And the savings, I'm trying to figure out how we're getting a savings. As you talk about, when you put it all in one place, you're having to bring these people in and house them now, as opposed to, I guess, they're being able to travel back and forth home overnight or something to get their training.
Well, I think that was Chairman Martin's point, too, that there's not a big savings in here due to consolidation. This is part of the budget reduction measures to hit our 6.1% that we were asked to hit. So it's eliminate those regional academies. Where we had, I think 4, it could have been 5.
Back up, Commissioner. I think all this came about before we had the, quote, budget reduction on the idea of using TIF.
TIF, oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I mean, TIF was set up for that purpose before we had a need of a, quote, budget reduction coming about.
Yes, sir. I'm not sure I understand the...
Well, my question is, we're looking at TIF, and you called it a budget reduction, and I said, I don't know if that's the case, because they weren't looking at a budget reduction need in consolidating to go into TIF 3 years ago, and they started working on this.
I think the chairman's asking, Commissioner Owens, is you're closing the 4 training facilities.
Yes, sir.
I think you're doing that now because you're not training people, because we're not hiring people right now. But his question, is long term. Why would you close those and consolidate the training into TIF or JIPSTEC? Why not keep them open and train them regionally? Is that correct, Chairman Williams? Why would you
want to have a centralized training facility at all?
I guess I'm still not tracking that, and I apologize.
If you could train people in Northwest Georgia,
Right.
What's the motivating factor behind it?
Motivating factor behind these regional academies is a straight out cost.
Closing them and putting it all in one consolidated location.
Because the vast majority of our training activities don't take place in Northeast, Northwest. They take place South and Southeast and Southwest. I think we've got something like, yes, sir, I think we've got something like 5 prisons maybe here north. The rest of the prisons and the vast majority of the PDCs are in the prison belt along US 280 running east and west across there. So the vast majority of our staff are actually south of Macon.
That was too easy, Ryan. So why wouldn't we have built a training facility down there along that corridor? Why would we have built it north of Macon?
Don't have this. That was
inquiring minds want to know.
Yes, sir. I understand.
What's going on?
Well, I understand that, and that's okay. I don't think it went.
Because we bought TIF. That's why. Had to use TIF for something. Let's get real. We bought TIF, that's why. That's what I was just saying to Chairman Ross here. We bought TIF, so now we got to make use of it.
I apologize for my density there. I wasn't quite tracking on where we were going. I apologize for that.
Well,
no, sir, that's fine.
Let's leave on the note. My favorite thing to talk about. Let's talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
I happened to drive by that facility the other day, and are we on track? Because it doesn't look like anything's been done in the last 4 or 5 months.
No, that's an incredible amount of work.
I'm saying from the outside.
Yeah, you couldn't see it. Yeah.
I'm just driving by, looking at the silk fence and all the dirt being in the same place.
Yeah. We've got, I think off the top of my head, I think we've got about 14 buildings there, Chairman Larry. I don't know if you're here.
I think we got at least 14 buildings.
I think there's about 14, but how many do we have, Larry?
17. We're going to renovate 14.
17, going to renovate 14. The training academy, we believe, will have fully up and operational this calendar year if the plans go.
What was your original plan for having it up and operational?
Last year, or 18 months ago, I believe it was. For the record, there, recall the governor's recommended the full amount every year, and it's been kind of split.
Well, and equally for the record, having all the bond money done doesn't mean that it's all been done in that same year.
Clearly understand. Clearly understand.
I don't think financing has gated the progress of that building at all. If I'm wrong, somebody point that out to me.
Okay.
But I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's taken longer than we thought. It's cost more than we thought. I mean, you're in a difficult position because you had to answer the question the other day. Is this absolutely all? And it's an easy question to answer because I'm not sure anybody in the legislature knows what we were supposed to get in the first place. So if you run out of money and do 14 buildings instead of 17 or 13 in front of 14, I don't know that anybody is going to ask. And again, I'm going to put you in a tough chair. Is it more important for you? Is new office space for the Department of Corrections and Core Mission of Corrections, or is it getting these folks out of the county jail?
Core mission is.
I know that's not a fair question.
I want to answer your question. No, I'm going to try to be entirely consistent. Just like our core mission is not providing fire services for local communities, even though I'd love to do so. Even though our core mission is not providing canines for I would love to do so. The Corps Mission Department question, quite simply, is to keep inmates supervised probationers. Period. It will enhance some, but I mean, it's not Corps Mission. I can't make that argument as Corps Mission. But the fact of the matter is, when you're going to consolidate 5 separate locations, and I apologize, I didn't come prepared to talk about this, and I thought that was going to be a 10 question, so I'm going totally off the top of my head here. I don't know if they have been or not. Okay.
No, and I don't mean to make light of it, and I really don't. I just, 2 years ago when it came out, I questioned it. I questioned it last year. I mean, nobody knew this was coming, but especially, an issue. Because one of the things that we keep talking about, we're going to be down there, and a bunch of people are not going to go with us, so they're not going to go. So we're hiring. So you can't count that, and we'll talk about it. I'll do that. We'll just wait and talk about it when we get to 2010. But the cost justification for moving down there is very hard still for me to say. And I mean, guys, it's, I get it from special agents to the GBI, and I get it from the folks that work for you. And if I were them, I'd be writing it myself. Is, please, Mr. Chairman, help us get our raise back. And when I'm trying to, find the money, it's not there. It's just not.
Right.
Kind of like, I'd love to do it, but we're doing that, and yet we're looking at bond money, and I know it's only this much, and it only has this much debt service. But I just don't. I mean, it's just. I mean, Ken Stewart's in that economic development business. We ought to get, we ought to get him and I's project to go around and do down that facility. Let you guys, build whatever budget. If you have to have the bandwidth for training, and I'm done with that. Yes, sir.
Commissioner, when we are testing for probation officers, correction officers, are we responsible in the department there for that testing? Or do you do the testing for new applicants and all?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. Becky, you know the answer?
For new applicants, those that are not yet employed, would you do?
Right.
I believe that just changed, and I believe Post is now providing the test, but we're administering it on their behalf.
All right, you administered. Who pays for the booklets and all of the that come into that?
Well, I'll have to check on that. I would hate to tell you wrong on that because I know it just changed, and I believe they provided an initial supply of booklets based on the number of correctional officers that we normally hire and interview per month. So I believe they provided an initial supply, and after that we may be responsible.
All right. If you'll check back with me, I want to talk to you about that issue.
I certainly will.
Commissioner, one last thing before we get in here. You mentioned, have you guys developed, because again, I think the general revenue ones are not going to be where we'd like to be. Have you guys looked at, a furlough program across the entire system? So can you just get with Ms. East,
I could tell you right now, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to know, we have plans for furloughs March, April, May, June. Furlough all state employees March, April, May, June, but only furlough non-security employees for 2 of those months. So the last 4 months of the fiscal year, if the revenues continue to decline, obviously, and we've got to continue to hit that budget mark of $71 million, we've got a plan in place. So the bottom line is all employees four times, 4 days in 4 months. Security, the guys that wear the blue uniforms carry the badge twice in 4 months. I may have, I'm sorry. But security gets less.
I thought that's what you meant.
Yes, sir.
And I mean, security is the
Core.
the vast part of your
Yes, sir.
We all also
Everybody.
Security of the,
Yes, sir.
any further questions on this department correction? All right. Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I mean, none of these questions are meant in an argumentative fashion.
Sir, they're not taken that way. They're not taken that way.
If it's not further, let me just some business with the committee. We will meet again later this week. The committee members. I'll also probably have.
The Public Defender Standards Council. We want to get them together, but we're going to let them get together before we invite them in here, because right now they can't make up their mind. Well, I don't know, sir. We right now they can't make up their mind who over there